Hello, my name is Sam Felton and welcome to Expert Interviews here on Smash the Fat. With me today is the lead nutritionist for Scottish Rugby, so I'm trying to get some secrets for the Six Nations at the moment. It's Richard Chessor. How you doing, Richard?
I'm great, Sam. Thanks very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you here and kind of, trying to help out the England team with their nutrition. But no, only kidding. For any Scottish people watching, he is not kind of a double agent or anything like that. Okay?
No, not at all. I wouldn't last very long if I was.
No, definitely not. So I was kind of introduced to you at Lateral Health. Really, thanks to Emily Maguire and Francis, who put together a fantastic event up in Edinburgh, and you were kind of one of the lead speakers there, being the lead nutritionist for Scottish Rugby, and it's fantastic to actually have you on the show, because unfortunately I didn't get to see your talk as I was kind of in midair as you were talking. But kind of before we get into today's subject, which is nutrition for rugby, and we'll kind of go into other sports as well that you've worked with. But how exactly did you get into this world of nutrition, and how did you get to become the lead nutritionist for Scottish Rugby? I'm sure there's a lot of jealous folks out there.
Yeah, well, I must say I'm very, very fortunate, very privileged to be in the position that I'm in. But the route prior to this, then, I came into nutrition via sports science, so it's quite a common route for sports science graduates to then start to specialize in specific disciplines, of which nutrition. Well, there's a question in itself: does sports nutrition sit as a discipline of sports science, or is it a discipline, a subdiscipline, a subset of nutrition in general? So maybe we'll get into that a wee bit later. But yeah, I came through a background of sports science, so then I came out of my undergrad and I kind of looked at myself and went, well, I wouldn't employ me. I don't really think I actually know anything, so I better do a little bit of extra study and try and work out what this is all about. And it was, I suppose, during the latter years of my undergrad, I was an aspiring athlete, not a very good one, but an aspiring one nonetheless. And I was one of those guys that was always looking at what other athletes were doing. So I really wanted to know what their what training they were doing, what recovery they were doing, what they were eating. And you start to dig a little deeper, and there's talented guys there who were, as far as I could see, with very limited nutrition knowledge, making real basic mistakes. So I started to maybe make a few suggestions and give them a few tweaks, and started to really enjoy that, and I started to find, from there, kind of built up the practitioner that I am just now by starting to work out my own philosophies, my own styles, my own methods for communicating with athletes. So yeah, everything kind of snowballed from there, and then I got a big break in work with an internship for the English Institute of Sport, working under Nigel Mitchell, who's the head of British Cycling and Team Sky now. So I had a fantastic learning curve from him, and things just grew on from there, and I joined Scottish Rugby in 2008 now, so quite a few years ago, and yeah, we've got a great setup up here.
That's fantastic. What a journey that's kind of been, go from cycling to rugby, because obviously every sport is ever so slightly different, and it was judo as well.
Yeah, so before, in the build up to the 2008 Beijing Games, I was working with the Olympic Judo and Boxing teams, so I was kind of making a specialism in the weight category sports there, which is absolutely fascinating to work in as far as nutrition is concerned, because unless you get it right on the scales, then you don't compete. So you can train for 4 years for an Olympics, and if you miss the weight, you miss the weight. You don't even step into the ring or step onto the mat. So there's a lot to be worked on and to be thought about with those sports.
Yeah, there's a lot of responsibility there as the nutritionist as well. If you don't get it right, then you're getting it in the neck, basically.
Absolutely.
It's kind of fascinating. But kind of on from that, what exactly does a nutritionist do in a sports team, apart from sort of say, avoid eating ice cream?
Yes. Well, I suppose my role, I'm responsible for all the nutrition service across all of Scottish Rugby. So that'll be from the national team that plays against Wales on Sunday, this coming Sunday, all the way through to our Scotland under-16 players who have tournaments later on in the year. So it's my responsibility to make sure what they're eating, what they're employing as recovery strategies, nutritional recovery strategies, their environment, their food environment, that's all set up, that's all in place, and that's all fostering positive behaviours.
Yeah, and trying to just give them that structure that they need, because there is a lot of confusion out there, and if you kind of have a lead authority kind of within a team and everybody's on the same line of thought, especially kind of in a sports team where you do need that unity together, really, don't you? And I mean, I've spoken with I'm trying to remember his name now, but the chap at the LA Lakers who's implemented, you know, kind of like a low-carb paleo, just real foods kind of diet. Yeah, he kind of talked about some of the things that they use in terms of kind of cheat sheets. There's kind of billboards everywhere in the gym and stuff, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I mean that stuff's absolutely brilliant, because you've kind of given the answer there, that the environment is absolutely critical. So we'll spend a lot of time making sure that we set the environment up for the players, because we can't always be there. You know, there's not a nutritionist with every player for every meal, advising them and guiding them, and even making and even writing diet plans for every player is impossible because of the numbers we're dealing with. So you've got to make sure your environment is spot on, and that means if we need the guys to be consuming big meals, lots of carbohydrate, lots of protein at certain times, then we set up the environment to do so, and we feed them those things. We surround them by the right types of foods at the right times, and the idea there being that if we can control the environment when at key times and when they're in around the club or the team, then they'll take those positive habits and those positive behaviours home and implement them at home, because even setting everything up right at the club is still maybe only 30-40% of their nutrition throughout the day. There's a lot of time when they're completely autonomous with their own nutrition needs. So we've got to make sure the positive behaviours transfer from one to the other.
Certainly, and when you do have an elite sports team, you have people from kind of all walks of life that have kind of have different upbringings as well. So what's it like trying to get that sort of unity within a team? And when it comes to rugby, is it different nutrition plans for the different player roles as well? Say a prop to a hooker.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So there'll be varying demands. We don't necessarily get into that in a huge amount of detail with regards to diet plan for each specific position, but instead we set the protocols up to allow them to follow the right plan, so follow the right eating strategies with the right nutrient balances at the right times, and then support them in finding their own way to their own equilibrium, so to speak. So, yeah, naturally speaking, a prop who's in maybe a heavy strength training mode, doing a lot of scrummaging work, will require quite a lot of calories. You know, these guys are quite often upwards of 120 kilos in comparison to maybe an 80-90 kilo winger who's got a relatively low training volume sometimes, but very high training intensity. So yeah, there's different needs. Sometimes they equal out, although it's different. I suppose the nutrients would partition in slightly different ways across their intake. But yeah, dealing with players of different backgrounds is another interesting one. And I suppose that's one of the great things about food and nutrition, is you can bring people together and experience new dishes, new foods in a very cohesive way. So it's the catering's not just, or the team eating's not just part of fuel and function. It's also part of being a team, and you know, the squad. Take a Six Nations squad, for example. I think they'll have about just short of 100 meals together over that period. So it's a lot of catering. It's a lot of time when you're sat around tables, sat around with similar types of people. So you've got to get that environment right to prevent boredom, to prevent people getting stale and ultimately frustrated with it, and then wanting to find the nearest McDonald's.
Absolutely, and it's just like it is at home in terms of it's all about creating that family social atmosphere, because there's a lot of kind of banter that flies around the changing room, but I'm sure around the dinner table as well, and kind of, you know, having good nutritious food is kind of part of that as well. So it's kind of a really, really important part of the day,
Definitely,
kind of during their training.
It's also a really important learning tool for some of the younger players. So, you know, within a squad, you'll have guys who might be 18, 19 years old, up to guys who may be in the latter stages of their career at 34, 35, maybe. Now, those guys at 34, 35 have very different views on nutrition. They might be the primary nutrition supplier, if you like, at home for a wife and kids, versus the 18-year-old who's, you know, first time away from home in his first flat on his own. He's got a completely different outlook on nutrition. So we've got to use that team environment as a learning environment as well, to expose them to foods that they maybe wouldn't self-select to buy in the shops or to cook themselves, and just use that and use the peer group support then to foster positive practices.
Definitely, that's fantastic to hear. And kind of what did you say? Because that sounds pretty challenging. But what would you say is your biggest challenge out of all of that when it comes to, you know, developing nutrition for elite athletes?
I think one of the biggest challenges that the majority of practitioners will face is actually just having enough time on the ground with the players. You know, players have a very, very busy schedule, from coming in at a club at maybe 8 o'clock in the morning all the way through until leaving in the late afternoon. Everything's scheduled for them, so even the rest periods are scheduled. So if I've got a day a week in the particular squad, the amount of actual contact time I have with the squad as a whole and with individual players is actually sometimes really quite small. So it means I've got to deliver my messages as efficiently as possible. I've got to take into consideration the needs of the wider group, not just the needs of individuals. And then we've got to, like I said before, we've got to use that environment to pass that message on. So a lot of the time, because I can't be with all the squads at once, I've got to use my strength conditioning coaches, my rugby coaches, as my eyes on the ground, and they're the ones that feed into me, and maybe I give them some advice and hints and tips on how to pass that information on, how to keep a player on track. So yeah, it's probably time on the ground is the hardest point, and yeah, that'll be experienced by practitioners across the country and across a number of different sports. It's about being as efficient as possible, I suppose.
Fascinating. And as many people know, rugby players tend to be kind of you're relatively kind of independent thinking types, and also tend to be kind of very, very confident in what they do. So what's it like trying to get that message across when there's kind of, you know, banter flying everywhere, or are they taking it fully seriously all of the time?
Yeah, there's always a challenge. I mean, in any one group, you'll get maybe 30% of guys will immediately buy into a new strategy or a new protocol. 30% will be on the brink. Another 30% will say, "Yeah, I'm going to leave this one out. I don't think I need that." So it's hence why we focus a lot on the team strategies. And if we can get, you know, 80% plus of players following the team strategies 95% of the time, then we're doing a pretty good job, because then it gives us enough time to go into those guys who aren't keen on employing the strategies, or we don't think it fits for them, and do a little bit more individual work there. But yeah, the sort of free-thinking rugby player, particularly when it comes to food, is not something I discourage. I quite often hear a lot of practitioners say, well, you would immediately dismiss an alternative diet strategy, so be it paleo or an ancestral diet or a high-fat, low-carb or anything like that. I would immediately say, "Oh, you're interested in that? Fantastic. Let's have a conversation about it. Let's foster that positivity about nutrition, and then maybe we start to steer it in the direction that's going to be of the perfect balance between supporting performance, recovery, adaptation, and meeting their individual preferences, their individual goals." So yeah, I'll never put a brick wall up about nutrition. It's always an open door, regardless of how bizarre the strategy might sound. But yeah, we've then got to put the brakes on for some guys and put the buffers on, and slow them down and steer them in the right way again.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. And kind of when it comes to, say, your Sunday rugby player, how should they deal with their nutrition? Because they're kind of in the real world, and they don't have everything scheduled. They've got a day job, they've got family in the evening. Not that the elite rugby players don't, and they want to go out on a Friday night and have a few beers, or on a Sunday night after the game. How would you kind of give those people the general advice that you'd give?
Sure. What I'd probably look at them to do is focus on, what are their key times throughout the week? What are the times that they really want to protect, and they want to make sure that they can get the most out of themselves? Because the reality is there that they don't need to be eating the healthiest of diet, the most appropriate rugby diet 24/7, but maybe when it comes to club training on a Tuesday night, they've got to eat well beforehand to be able to train properly. They've got to recover well afterwards so they can get some of those training stimulus adaptations. So protecting the quality and the content of the meals on Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening will be really important, and then again on the Thursday evening for the next club session. So when it comes to the Sunday game, they're actually in a position where they can maybe enjoy the game that little bit more, because they're that little better fueled, a little better recovered, a little bit fitter, faster, stronger. And then I certainly wouldn't, for the recreational player, discourage them employing a slightly more relaxed attitude towards eating on a Sunday afternoon, if that's part of the social cohesion that is a rugby team.
Fantastic. And kind of when it comes to your general philosophies for athletes, kind of full stop, most recently there's been a lot of look into lower carb performance. Most recently, I don't know if you watch Serial Killers, but the second Serial Killers is coming out on March 1st. People can pre-order that via Yekra, which is a video on demand service, via smashthefat.com/CK2. How do you see kind of all of this working, especially kind of within team sports? Because a lot of this is kind of endurance exercises.
Yeah, so I suppose the overriding philosophy is that change will come from consistent execution of positive behaviours. So that's one thing we say to the players a lot, is that it's all fine and well having one meal that is perfect balance at the right time, the right context, and so on. But you've got to back that up time and time again. And if you are able to do that, that's when we're going to see change that is a resilient change that we're going to be fitter, faster, stronger from. And therefore, it means if there's little hiccups, there's little slip-ups in your diet across the way, it's not necessarily a problem. So if we look at something like the lower carb movement at the moment, there might well be periods of time within a rugby player's week, even day, but certainly within their season, that we can embrace these things. It doesn't necessarily have to be the definitive diet or the singular diet. Yeah. I'm certainly a big believer in employing the right strategy at that right time, but then being flexible enough to appreciate that strategy isn't always going to be the same. It's going to change as your circumstances change, your environment changes, your lifestyle changes, so you've got to be flexible enough to change the diet with it. So yeah, it might become a point where there's a player who actually benefits from employing a lower carbohydrate strategy for a period of maybe even a couple of seasons. It might even be throughout a window within the season to elicit certain body composition changes, force certain training adaptations. But it's about being able to identify quickly enough when that window is going to occur, and then being able to control it such that the performance of the player doesn't suffer during it.
That's fantastic, and that's kind of really your job, making sure that people are taking appropriate action in specific situations for the relevant results as well, basically. And that's kind of why it's really important, especially kind of for sports nutrition, to regulate it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's the voluntary regulatory body in the UK is called the SENr, the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register, and that essentially accredits individuals who are at a level to work autonomously within sport, and in particular elite sport, because sportsmen are they're a different population to the general population. They do have very unique needs, and I think we've got to be smart about protecting those these athletes as best as possible, especially if you're going to be looking to work with younger athletes, maybe female athletes, female endurance athletes who are at risk of significant health detriment if their nutrition strategies aren't right, let alone performance detriment as well. So yeah, I'm a big believer in the appropriate regulation and accreditation for individuals to work within the sports arena, and as part of that, I sit on the board of the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register as well.
That's fantastic. So we got the top dog with us, and on that note, what's your view on supplementation when it comes to sports and sports performance?
Well, personally, I would always want to take a food-first approach. So if there's an opportunity to do it through food alone, then we will do that. And therefore, by taking that angle, you move down a route of supplements being used for convenience, which they are. You know, they're very transportable, they're quick and easy, they're measurable as well. So it's a lot easier to control the nutritional intake when you're using supplements on certain occasions. Or you need to use them for ergogenic purposes. So we take a supplement like creatine, for example, to improve our creatine energy system and the recovery of that system for high-intensity intermittent activity. So, yeah, we like to push food first at every possible opportunity, and then the other major consideration for any elite athlete who's subjected to anti-doping testing is there's a significant risk of nutritional supplements being contaminated with banned substances. So the elite athlete has to be incredibly careful about where they select those sources of nutritional supplements, and particularly using bodies like Informed Sport, which is a body that's checks the content, checks the ingredients, and tests these nutritional supplements for the presence of banned substances. That would be a first stop for any elite athlete to ensure that their product is safe to use, essentially.
Fantastic. And I'm sure a lot of kind of young aspiring nutritionists and sports scientists out there might be kind of looking at your job thinking that would be awesome to be a lead nutritionist in an elite sports team environment. I mean, what a job to have. That's absolutely fantastic. So kind of what advice would you give those people that are looking to, you know, get into the sports arena?
Sure. The first thing I would do is I would look at the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register competencies, and I would try and map yourself to that, see where you're falling short, see where you're already hitting, and depending what stage of your career you're at, that might help dictate your future study, or it might just highlight the areas that you need to get a little bit more experience in. Now, if I was speaking to any students, I'd certainly be saying, get yourself out there. Get yourself exposed to different sports, different teams, different communities, and do as much volunteering work as you can, because it not only helps shape you and your ideas, your practices, but it exposes you to other people. The nature of high performance sport is it's relatively small community. So by getting exposed to the right people at the right time, you never know what opportunities might just pop up. And say I was very fortuitous to get into the position I was in, but I'd like to also think that I created more opportunities for me to be fortuitous, and hence one of the reasons I got here. So yeah, maybe check out the competencies first and foremost, and see how you compare to that, and then give yourself as much opportunity to get experience as possible.
Fantastic advice, and it is exactly that. Life is all about, you know, from experience to experience, or in kind of the career environment, it is from job to job, and then it leads to eventually something where you're in a position like yourself, and it's a little bit of kind of putting yourself out there to give yourself the opportunity, but working hard at the same time and improving yourself, and following those competencies that are available on the website, I assume.
Yeah, you'll be able to pick them up on senr.org.uk, I think it is.
Excellent, and people can find out about that more there.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. And before we wrap things up, did you have any other wise words to all the listeners and viewers out there?
Wise words. I would probably just go with consistency, and context is a very popular word at the moment in the sports nutrition industry, but it's a very appropriate one as well. So if ever you're struggling to think what you should be eating, what you should be doing, then just have a look around you, see what you're doing, see what your requirements are for that day, and then try and control your food environment to meet those requirements as much as possible. I think the majority of the time people come unstuck with a diet plan is that they, or a particular system of eating and nutrition plan, is they don't control their food environment well enough, and therefore they get exposed to too many differing messages, they get exposed to advertising and offers and deals and so on. And we all like to take, our default approach is to take the line of least resistance. So sometimes it seems a lot easier to let go of the plan than stick on it. But if you can identify when those situations are going to occur and control for those triggers before they happen, then you're going to keep yourself well on track.
Fantastic advice again. Brilliant, Rich. Great to hear kind of a voice of experience and wisdom at the same time, which that's fantastic. And it's great that it's somebody that's in a position as you are, and hopefully kind of the Scots, you'll do a lot better this year than you did last year in the Six Nations. And I wish
we're certainly open to good tournament.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm wishing the Scots all the best of luck against England in a couple of few weeks time. But we'll see. We'll let them fight it out anyway.
Indeed.
Fantastic. People can ask you questions as well on Twitter, or follow you just on Twitter, RJC_nutrition. Is that right?
That's the one.
Fantastic. And there's only one more thing to do, and that's to hear a smash it out from Richard Chessor. So on 3, I want you to shout "smash it out" to the camera. So okay. 1, 2, 3.
Smash it out.
That's what I'm talking about. Fantastic, mate. Well, everybody, go follow Rich on Twitter if you want a voice of reason in the sports nutrition world, RJC_nutrition. And be sure, if you are an aspiring nutritionist, head over to SENr.org.uk. Was that right there, Rich?
That's the one. Yep, that sounds good.
Perfect, fantastic. All right, Rich, I'll speak to you soon, mate.
Take care. Thanks for having me.
Bye.